What's up, everybody? This is Albert, and we're back with another video for this project called Raising Souls. And the book we're going to be discussing for this video is George M. Johnson's All Boys Aren't Blue. For those who don't know, George M. Johnson is a journalist and activist and pretty much journalists, and pretty much this is their first book. So, and it was just released this year. So this is a new book. It was released in April of this year, and it's pretty much getting a lot of so it's pretty much still being popular and stuff like that right now. But this is like one of the most recent queer literature that you can get into to learn about LGBTQ plus issues. And especially with George M. Johnson's tackle on what it feels to how to grapple with the intersections of being Black and being queer. And I'm gonna try my best to use their pronouns because they go by they them pronouns now. And during this book, they were pretty much talking about their experience with manliness and manhood and masculinity, especially when you are a Black queer person. And we can. This is a memoir, like a young adult memoir. So I think this is gonna be in like high schools and stuff like that. So because this is like a good book for teens and young adults that are still trying to grapple with their identity, and probably not even just their queer identity or Black identity, but trying to find themselves and try to make sense and have the language to navigate through society. And it's pretty much similar to Darnell L. Moore's No Ashes in the Fire with being Black and queer. And George M. Johnson is from New Jersey as well. So it's a lot of New Jersey queer history that you can get. So hopefully this video isn't long, because this is a good short read, because it's very easy, very comprehensive, and digestible. And so we can get into it. So there's an introduction that Johnson titled Black, Queer, and Here. So this pretty much talks about what they've been what they heard when their mom gave birth to them, and I think it was their nanny. Their nanny was their maternal grandmother, so she's been like a sole character throughout the book too. And and Johnson said when their head was came out and out when during the delivery, their grandma was thinking it was going to be a girl, was thinking Johnson was going to be a girl because of the curly hair. And and then it pretty much got into because she assumed that Johnson was going to be a girl. So and then Johnson was delivered and turns out it's a boy. So pretty much talking about how we assign gender through sex. So for those who don't know, there's a difference between sex and gender. Gender is the constructs that society puts on. So for example, and sex is the biology and the chromosomes and stuff like that. So for male organs and stuff like that, it's XY, and for female or chromosomes, it's XX. But people don't know that there are many different types of chromosomes, and I think biology is getting to that. Like, they're understanding that some people they have male chromosomes, but they have these characteristics that are described as feminine, which is like lack of hair and stuff like that. So we don't even think about and think of like animals and stuff like that. Like, they don't really have roles. Like, as humans, we have these roles, and we use gender to determine what type of roles are are carried. Like women, they cook and clean and stuff like that, and men, they're the breadwinners, and they bring home the bacon and stuff like that. Hunter gatherers, and we have all these roles because of the what society constructed as gender. And we get into Johnson's critique of like gender reveal parties, because we don't like, especially when if you're like trans and and your gender non-conforming, like you're not gonna have that sometimes some people are not gonna have that gender for the rest of their life and stuff like that. And some people are intersex. They have androgynous organs and stuff like that. Like we and doctors, they determine sometimes they determine the gender based off the length of the penis, because because if you can look at the vagina as like a backwards penis, because there's like the clitoris, and some people see that as the penis and stuff like that. Like it's just the way biology has of working things, and we use gender to determine the identity of that person. And we have to understand that gender is fluid, and it's a spectrum, and it's not binary. Like it's not just man and woman. There are people that are non-binary. Some people like for example, I use he him pronouns because I identify with the and I identify as a man. I identify with everything that was assigned to me at birth. But some people, they go through things and they don't identify with what they were assigned at birth. So they go through gender dysphoria too. Sometimes some people, if you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth, you can have gender dysphoria. But it's a specific thing that especially trans people, they go through. So that's how they realize that they realize that this isn't their identity, and so they go through transition. So that's how that's why trans people exist and stuff like that. Like especially with the other way society constructs gender, like it can be confusing, and it can lead to depression, sometimes suicide. And being the gender that you most identify with gives you this affinity, and you have a better understanding of self. And that's pretty much it, and what Johnson was trying to go through in that section. And then went into the culture of using the N-word and stuff like that, because Johnson, we know how controversial the N-word is. Like who gets to some people explain that black people can only say the N-word, other non-black people can't say it, because black people, we have a specific history to that word, and some people use it as a reclamation of the power that white supremacy was inflicting on them. So and that's how people cope with it and stuff like that. And but it's also some black people that don't use the N word because they recognize that that was the word that lynch mobs and stuff like that. That was the final word before black people heard before they were lynched or killed and beaten and stuff like that. So there was some trauma with that word. So Johnson was pretty much talking about even how the NAACP said that we need to get away from that word. We need to stop using it and stuff like that, and be the respectable Negro, and thinking this trying to the approach they were using was pretty much like erasing the fact that that word existed, and And the way some black people, they use that word is just to reclaim the power and trying to cope with the realities of racism and stuff like that. So, but that's like also how people build community and stuff like that. Something with like, we use language and stuff like that to interact. So it's like, how do we you just not talk about something like how controversial the N-word is and stuff like that. So that's pretty much what Johnson was getting to in that section. And then there was this quote that Johnson said, many of us are always in a state of working through something, always in a state of becoming a more aware version of self. And with some people, that's the N-word and stuff like that. And it pretty much helps you be affirming your blackness for some people. Like, it's even, yeah, it's like, even though that word is used as the way to villainize black people, I think black people, they use it as a way to know that they have power and stuff like that. So that's how some people they just use the word. And remember, it's the same thing with the F word, because Johnson went into how the F word for LGBTQ people, how that was used to villainize them, but they used that as to reclaim from the power. Like queer, for example, queer was seen as a slur against LGBTQ plus people, but now it's used as a way to give space to those that identify with. Like language is always evolving. Like black people, black was used was seen as a slur and stuff like that back then. Like colors was seen as a slur, Negro was seen as a slur, but only certain communities for now, they get to use that word to make space for themselves and give them a sense of self to go through life with that identity. That's pretty much how the best way I can explain it, and how Johnson was pretty much trying to say. And then they were talking about being queer and the socializations that come with anti-queerness, and how queer representation is like, you pretty much don't understand yourself without seeing it through other people. So pretty much talk about media and how queer people are represented, and the derogatory representations that are come with it. So you feel, because of these portrayals, since you see these portrayals that are not positive, you see something wrong with you, so you internalize that, and you inflict it on other people too, and that causes a cycle of violence that white supremacy and colonialism does. Like queer baiting, for example. Like, I think there's this history with queer characters that tend to be the villains, like him from the Powerpuff Girls, and Ursula from The Little Mermaid, because Ursula was inspired by a drag queen, Divine. And yeah, pretty much talking about how we antagonize have these queer antagonists, and then we put that into queer communities. So that influenced public policy too, because you think about the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and because the queer community, and especially black queer communities, it affected them the most. And because of what society put the messages that are passed around, and anti-queerness that are going around, they're neglected and stuff like that. So that's why there wasn't a good research for the vaccination and cure for HIV and AIDS. So yeah, so pretty much talks about how media and representation, and how that influenced public policy too. And then Then Johnson talked about the importance of telling our stories and giving proper and positive representation to queer people, and how we need to tell our own stories and stuff like that, because you're not gonna because the oppressors will always tell you who your enemy is, and they'll tell you like the enemy is that this or that, this divide and conquer tactic. And same with the Southern strategy that I explained in Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And it'll tell you even that you're an enemy to your own self and stuff like that. So it's important to tell stories. And there was this quote by Toni Morrison that that influenced Johnson to make this memoir, because they didn't grow up with queer representation through literature and stuff like that. So, and Toni Morrison said, if there's a book that you want to read but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. So that's pretty much the drive for this memoir. And yeah, Johnson also said that the things I had been chasing were all just a myth to turn me into someone I didn't want to be. So pretty much talking about heteronormativity and anti-blackness and stuff like that. And if you let these messages that society puts you in, you're gonna be an inauthentic version of you, and that's gonna hurt you in the long run. And that was it for the introduction. So yeah, we can get into chapter 1. So chapter 1 was titled Smile. So we'll get into more into why it was titled Smile. And Johnson started the chapter talking about their family and their upbringing in New Jersey. And they have a younger brother named Garrett. They also have some half brothers and half sisters from their father's previous marriage. And everyone and they mainly lived with their younger brother and their parents and their nanny. So their nanny was the primary caregiver and was pretty much the nurturer and pretty much the character that raised George. And yeah, their mother was owned a hair salon, but also worked as a secretary at the police department. And their father was a police officer. So the title "All Boys Aren't Blue" was partly inspired by their father being a police officer, because when you have a police officer, you're known as a blue family and stuff like that. But as of right now, Johnson has this anti-police still has this anti-police and anti-prison politic, and believes in prison and police abolition, stuff like that. Even with their father was a police when their father was a police officer. And they worked long hours and stuff like that. So it's like nanny is the only one that was available to take care of them because their parents were working. And yeah, so the pretty much talk about the household and how there were, even though they had this, everyone was in the family and stuff like that, there was still some toxicity that was going on, like their aunts and uncle was on drugs and stuff like that. And pretty much talk about family trauma, and pretty much known that there's no such thing as a perfect family and stuff like that. Like families, we all have our certain dysfunctions and stuff like that. Like Bell Hooks was talking about in All About Love. Like it's just, we're just humans and we're trying to figure out things, and sometimes learning through that it harms others, but we also had to be held accountable for it. And they had this understanding of gender when they were 5 years old. So pretty much talk about how boys and girls are socialized. Like George never liked uh trucks and stuff that were typical boy things like Transformers and stuff like that. They always like baby dolls and doing hair, and they understand since then that they were different. So this is also part of the story about being different and stuff like that. And yeah, they were pretty much going through this phase where they feel like they were born in the wrong body. So it's a gender dysphoria that tends to happen to people that identify as trans and stuff like that. And Johnson identifies as non-binary. I think they identify as non-binary, but they use they them pronouns now and not he him. They used to use he him pronouns. But that pretty much goes you and to understand that gender is literally a performance. Like it's just a thing that like we like throw like a girl, you run like a girl, and all that stuff. Can you understand the misogynistic undertones of that? and and pretty much tells you that gender is just something to use to control society and put people in these boxes, and we have to do X, Y, and Z to qualify for manhood, for womanhood, or any other gender identity. And that's pretty much what Johnson was talking about. And for instance, Valentine's Day, like it's like because of heteronormativity, is expected that boys go give gifts to girls, but for people that identify as queer or are attracted to their own gender, they couldn't do things like that. So that's pretty much goes into gives you perspective and empathy to people that identify as queer. And then there was this incident that happened because it was like a normal school day, and they go to school with their older cousins, Raul and Rasul, and they always walk back or go to school with their cousins and then go back home from school with their cousins. And then there was this one day where there was this gang that was that was inter that encountered them. When that they were from school, and I think they knew Raul and Rasul, their older cousins, so they had like this beef between them. And then a fight happened, and George, they were 5 at the time, so they were vulnerable and defenseless. And the gang, all of them were like 10 or something. And then it got so hectic that they even pinned George to the ground, and they kicked him and kicked their teeth out. And that's goes in and then George was able to bite through the person that was kicking them through their teeth. Like they were able to have enough grapple, and then the person was left them alone, and then Roland Russell was taking care of it, and then told George to run. And then George was talking about the experience running from violence and stuff like that. So pretty much goes into that experience of being queer, how you have to run from stuff like that, situations like that are from that would have harmed you, and trying to find safety and agency. And pretty much talked about when they got home, and how everyone took care of George. And then talking about the comfort that their family gave them after that fight. And eventually Roland Rasul came back home. And then George talked about how that experience contributed to their trauma, because there were pictures of George barely smiling, and then they realized they were going through some trauma because of that fight. And I think it was the same way with Darnell Elmore, how violence that are inflicted on queer people, there's a certain level of trauma that is grappled into this, because it also influences your relationships. It influences how you perform masculinity and what you wanted from masculinity. It contributes to how you think about gender. And yeah, and then Johnson was talking about this all these, going through pictures of their childhood and talking about when they smiled, it was out of force and not out of pleasure. And Johnson said, my lips became protection for the smile that was stolen. So pretty much that day pretty much changed the trajectory of how they thought about joy and happiness. And they also said, my smile was a mask that hid the pain of suppressing who I was. So you can also see how being in the closet can be correlated to this, because you're suppressing an identity because of what society tells you what you can and cannot do. And they were also talking about how trauma can also be appeared in pop culture, because they were talking about how back then people wanted Mary J. Blige, for example. They think Mary J. Blige is better when she was giving sad songs, because black people have these trauma bonds. And and said, our community struggles to connect with joy in the way that we have with pain. So stuff like the songs that Mary J. Blige, because Mary J. Blige has a lot of songs about heartbreak and stuff like that. And black people wanted her to make that type of music, and they think she was better when she was making that type of music. And also talked about Cardi B's line on Bodak Yellow when she said, got a bag and fixed her teeth. And thinking about Cardi B probably had trauma from people making fun of her teeth, because she eventually got to a place where she can get dental care, and she was able to fix her teeth. So pretty much talking about stuff like that. And yeah, so, and then fast forward to when Johnson got older, and their mom had two brain aneurysms and was in the hospital bed. And she said, and she told, and when Johnson visited her, he was going through all these emotions and stuff like that, seeing their mom in the hospital bed. And their mom said, smile, Matt, just smile. And she calls George Matt, and because Matt is their Matthew is their middle name. And then Johnson gave her the biggest smile I ever had since the day I lost it. So that was like their moment where they finally smiled through joy, because they know that their mom was going to be okay. And yeah, that was it for chapter 1. So yeah, that chapter also went into how the boys will be boys, and how that's problematic, and how and how and therapy and stuff like that, because even though they found comfort from the violence, after that they realized that they were going through some trauma, so they didn't get counseling, they didn't go to therapy. And people were like, boys will be boys, you can tough it out, everything will be okay. So they didn't have honest discussions about why they weren't smiling. And they realized that they were reckoning with the trauma from that fight. And that was it. Yeah, that was it for chapter 1. So chapter 2 was titled Identity. And so before George's family calls them Matt or Matthew, and was going by Matthew, and even in school. So they had this fight with their cousin one day, and because George was seen as like the smart person, was getting all good grades and stuff like that, and had this fight with Little Rawl. And then Little Rawl said, that's why your real name is George. And then Johnson was talking to their grandma, and they were going into why they named them Matthew and not George. And they were pretty much it pretty much goes into the same way of gender, and how society understands gender. But it's the same thing with names. Like, you have to think about, a name was given to you by someone else, and it's whether you like it or not, and stuff like that. And you have to think about that name is part of your identity, and you have to and you have all these you let people determine, you let someone that you don't have a relationship with, which is a doctor, determine your fate through your name and stuff like that, and stuff. And even your own family, even if you don't have a good relationship with that family, that they gave you that identity. And they pretty much rewinded back to when George was when George's mom was pregnant with George, and they were thinking about names and stuff like that. And it was his father that wanted the name George. And then Nanny and her mom and George's mom were like, I don't want to name my child George. We're gonna call him Matthew, because Matthew from the Bible. And then they pretty much was really going through an identity crisis, because they used Matthew Johnson in school. So think about perfect when you go through attendance and stuff like that. When a teacher says Matthew Johnson, and you have to stand and be present and stuff like that. And that you also have to write your name when you complete like a quiz, when you do a quiz or a test. Like, you were thinking, George was really thinking deep about names, and how and sometimes that can give you like an identity crisis, because trans people, they have a birth name, and then they have a chosen name, and that chosen name is something that they identify with. And it's the same thing with gender. And that's pretty much the trajectory of who used to be called Matthew goes by George now. And you read this and you think about yourself, because my name is Albert, but I have relatives that call me AJ, because I'm Albert Jr. Some people call me Al. Some people call me Al B. So some people they have these they attach these labels and these things to know that y'all have some sort of relationship, and they closely identify with that. But know that you have the power to determine what people call you and stuff like that. And you have to give consent to what people call you. Like, if it bothers you, let that person know that you need to be called, that you rather be called that another name and stuff like that. And that was pretty much it for chapter 2. But George also went into Catholic school, and how you have to, and pretty much this experience in Catholic school. And in Catholic school, you have all these rules and standards and stuff like that. And Johnson was not about that life. It was the same way with Michelle Wallace's and Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman. And yeah, it was pretty much talk about say that the Catholic school didn't allow me to use a preferred name, so they had to go by a name that was on taxes and stuff like that. So they had to go by that name. They had to go by the states, what the state determines their name is, and not what that person identifies with. So pretty much talks about how the state and stuff like that, it doesn't always represent that person properly and respectfully. So yeah, and Johnson said my name was meant for me and me alone. So that's how they find more of an identity with George than Matthew. And that was it for chapter 2. So chapter 3 was titled Honey Child, and this is when Johnson was in elementary school, and they were pretty much known as the effeminate boy, even when they tried to hide it. And because when you have these effeminate characteristics, people know that you're different, and whatever, and people do many things with people that are considered different, and they and then Johnson was talking with their group of friends, and majority of their friends were girls, and they were using this term called honey child to interact with their friends. And the origins of the name honey child, of the term honey child, because one of their friends was this white girl from Germany, and their name was it was their last name was titled Child. And Johnson had this has an aunt Crystal, and some people called their aunt Crystal Honey. So that's how they got into Honey Child. And then it pretty much talks about queer lingo, and because phrases like throwing shade and sipping tea, and those type of phrases that come from the LGBTQ plus communities, especially black trans women, like in all these languages that come about in queer culture. And it became such a popular term, honey child, that it was causing distractions in class and stuff like that. So Johnson was having this talk with their mother, and their mom was talking about, so what is this word you've been using that's been caught, that these children, that teachers were saying were causing a ruckus in their class. And talked about like policing and stuff like that, like you can't use that word. And especially coming from something like a term like that, coming from a boy, people see as like problematic, and you're different, so we need to alienate you. So pretty much talking about how words and stuff like that, especially from LGBTQ plus people, they are policed. And it also does harm to the person that had an affinity with that term. And and with that, and pretty much talking about how violence is going on in queer communities, even though queer language is and queer aesthetics is popular, like the Telfar bags and stuff like that, because the Telfar bag is come from a black queer man. But people that are homophobic, people that are transphobic, they buy that bag, and they don't understand that stuff like that. You have to appreciate the product and who makes that product, and you use their language, you use their aesthetics and stuff like that. You use their labor because of capitalism, and you don't appreciate them, and that's something. But you still gave them coins, so that's cute for them. And pretty much talking about how pretty much talk about it's appropriating and stuff like that. And once we realize that it's coming from a queer person, it's a no-no, because so those homophobic and transphobic people that are using Telfar bags and all these designer clothes like Versace and stuff like that from queer fashion designers, you're using their products, but you're still homophobic and transphobic, and you're pretty much not appreciating what the product came from. And that's literally the same thing that's going on with Johnson using Honey Child, and how everyone in the school thinks it's a problem when that term is going around. And then Johnson said, the fear of being that vulnerable again outweighs the happiness that comes with being who you are, and so you agree to erase that something. So that contributed to suppression of their queer identity. And they didn't identify as queer. They didn't like have the language for everything yet, because they were in elementary school. So they were still trying to understand themselves. And Honey Child was helping them having an understanding of themselves. And because that's being policed in the school, they can't use it. And they have to go back to the heterosexual presentation. And yeah, that was it. And yeah, so pretty much talking about also the policing of femininity, because of how patriarchy works, and there's this empowerment for only masculinity and hypermasculinity that's acceptable, but something like Honey Child is seen as derogatory and antagonistic to and is seen as a threatening to the status quo. And yeah, and even something like that is seen as problematic, even though it's a word, it's not going to hurt people. And chapter 4 is titled I'm going to say it's just the F word, and it's the F word play, and it's F words play football too. And they were going into it's this socialization with boys and girls again that's going on in this chapter, and how boys, they play sports and girls, they play like double dutch and hula hoop and stuff like that. Like when you go to a playground, who tends to play basketball? It tends to be the boys. And who plays football? It tends to be the boys. And Johnson was talking about how they didn't feel in touch with themselves, doing boy things like football and basketball, so they chose to opt out. And they felt like more with them, they feel more in line with double dutch. And then they had this beautiful metaphor with double dutching. And they said when they were double dutching, it was me jumping in between personas, the person I wanted to be on the inside versus the person society told me I had to be on the outside. My pride grew with each mistake, each welt from the rope hitting my legs. They were battle scars for the hard effort I was putting in daily to perfect my jumping rope abilities. So pretty much talking about this war within themselves through double dutching, because when double dutching, you use 2 ropes, and Johnson was saying one rope is being the person, this queer person that you are on the inside, this thing that you're suppressing, and the other rope represents the person society told me I had to be on the outside. So this hyper masculine presentation, which is suppressing their queer identity. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But then Johnson was talking about how one of their friends, who happens to be a straight boy, a masculine boy, I think it was their name, Todd, and Todd was telling them how the other boys were talking about George hanging with the girls, and pretty much saying they were saying the F word and all that stuff. So all these rumors were going around, and talking about how even going back into Honey Child chapter, how children, they learn to hate. They learn all this stuff from their parents and stuff like that, and then it's passed on to the person that's the most marginalized. And Johnson said, and Johnson was going through this thing where they don't want to. Um, they were still in the battle and still struggling with their queer identity and trying to articulate everything, and was still in a state of fear. And so they were trying to prove themselves to the boys and saying that I'm just as good as the other boys. So that was pretty much what was going on. So they decided to give football a try and play with the boys in football. And next thing you know, Johnson was talking about how they used to play football with their cousins Raul and Rasul, and that helped them. And they and then they got a touchdown because they were running so fast. So thinking about the running from the fight that was going on in the Smile chapter, that helped them. And pretty much talked about they said in this quote, navigating in a space that questions your humanity isn't really living at all, it's existing. We all deserve more than just the ability to exist. So pretty much talking about how homophobia and heterosexism, it gives you this notion that you have to prove yourself to other people and not just be with not just to being in a state of fear and stuff like that. And even though that helped Johnson with proving themselves to the boys playing football and doing other sports such as track and field and stuff like that, they know that they shouldn't have to do all these things to prove themselves that they're worth and they're not disposable. Because once you're queer, some people just seeing you as disposable, that you're not worth it, you're not as good or as worthy as the other people, because you don't fit within the box and you're seen as different. But Johnson also talked about queer people in sports, because this idea that gay boys can't play sports, but that's a myth, because there are some queer people that are in sports, like Michael Sam, for example. And Michael Sam, I think it was in the NFL and was in doing college sports and stuff like that. So thinking about how Michael Sam had to hide his sexuality and going through heterosexual spaces in mainstream society, and having to hide their queer identity, but eventually got to a place where they are able to be comfortable with themselves and come out of the closet and say that they identify as gay. And yeah, that was pretty much the lesson in this chapter. Like you shouldn't have to prove yourselves to other people and not let fear get in the way of dictating your life. But you should use moments to you don't have to prove yourself, but you're worthy just for you have to tell yourself that you're worthy. It's about how you go through life, not how you go through life through the perspectives of others. And that was it for chapter 4. And yeah, so Johnson was also talking about in chapter 4 how track and field was giving them a protection from the sexuality, because people didn't really question, didn't ask, like, because there's always these expectations in society, like, who are you dating, who are you seeing, and stuff like that. Like, track and field Johnson was able to be so busy with track and field that was the only thing that was getting in the way of protecting from discussions regarding their queerness. So that was it for chapter 4. And chapter 5 was titled Honest Abe Lied to Me. So they were pretty much Johnson in this chapter was talking about what they were learning in education and going through school and what type of things that they learned in school. So, talking about Black History Month and how that was pretty much the 1 month we learn about Black history when it should be every day in school, and especially in a predominantly white school, and how history you learn in predominantly white schools and stuff like that, and how history can be whitewashed and it can be recidivized to fit the narrative and humanize the victors, the oppressors. So Thanksgiving, for example, some people said Thanksgiving is about being friendly with your neighbors and stuff like that, and talking about how pilgrims and the Mayflower, I think, and how it was a fellowship with the Native Americans when in reality it was the pilgrims and the colonizers. They committed genocide to the Native Americans, and they were trying to, and then there wasn't enough food in Europe, so that's how they got food to the Mayflower and to the and it wasn't the United States, it was Native American territory, and they passed diseases to Native Americans too, so that contributed to the oppression that indigenous folks are going through with their history, and also slavery and the Civil War and stuff like that. Like, check out my Ashada Shakur video because she went into that. But Johnson was talking about how they were going through a patriotism phase, like pro-America. You can't critique America. If you critique America, you might as well go to another country and stuff like that. So going through that phase. And they were also talking about the importance of knowing about Black figures and stuff like that. And symbolism can also be important. Like, it's important to know about Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr., and all of that. But but Johnson said you sometimes don't know you exist until you realize someone like you existed before. So it's pretty much talking about how important representation can be, but also going along with representation, it's important to have some substance with that representation. Like, what chapter? What was the quote that they were talking about? That was talking about symbolism. Yeah, symbolism is a threat to actual change. It's a chance for those in power to say, look how far you have come, rather than admitting, look how long we stopped you from getting here. So pretty much talking about how Abraham Lincoln said the Emancipation Proclamation, but still said he would have preserved the Union if he didn't have to get rid of slaves, and if he didn't have to emancipate slaves. And but talk about while Martin Luther King Jr. still had to fight for civil rights 100 years after slavery. So it didn't click for Johnson why stuff like that happened, and how stuff like that is seen as progress, but it tells you, like, Black people still don't have rights and they still have to fight for it. Y'all didn't recognize our humanity in the first place. We have to do all this stuff in order for y'all to recognize us, when y'all should recognize us just for being human. And that was pretty much what Johnson was going through, and they were going through trying to have a deeper understanding of race and racism, and talking about, I think, it was in junior high or somewhere. It was one of the schools where it was a white teacher and there were few Black faces in the classroom. So Johnson was going through that, and the white teacher was saying, yeah, slavery happened, but that was just the way things were. And Johnson was trying to interrogate that, and what makes you think that was just it should be just seen as normal? Why isn't just seen as morally wrong? And the teacher said, that's just the way things were. And if I was around back that in that time, I probably would have owned slaves too. So that shook the classroom, and Johnson was like, that teacher really said that. And yeah, also talk about microaggressions that also microaggressions that they face, like, are you in the hood? Is your family from the ghetto? Is that your real hair? Can I touch it? So all these things that black people had to go through in white spaces, predominantly white spaces. So microaggressions and stuff like that. And the they also talked about the idea that you should get over slavery and stuff like that, even though we're going through still going through the ramifications of slavery, like the prison industrial complex that I mentioned, and Angela Davis, Our Prisons Obsolete, and Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow. And Johnson said, saying that something was a norm of the past is a way not to have to deal with its ripple effects in the present. It removes the fact that hate doesn't just stop because a law or the time changed. So thinking about how legality doesn't determine morality, because slavery was seen as legal at times. It's still seen as legal right now through the prison industrial complex, but yeah, seen as we have to challenge these laws and what the United States, whatever policies are put in place. And yeah, and talked about how education can be used as a tool to promote white supremacy, and education can be used as a tool against white supremacy. So learn about things like I'm doing now, like learn about things that our ancestors have written, learn about Black liberation struggle, learn about the Black radical tradition, read from Angela Davis, Ashada Shakur, and other people that were pretty much against the status quo and against white supremacy and colonialism, and know how these struggles are continuing as we speak. And our heroes, some of them are still with us today. Like, for example, John Lewis just passed away, and we're still going through fights against voter suppression and trying to restore the Voting Rights Act. And that was it for chapter 5. And the next chapter is chapter, let me see, because I'm about to close this video, but I want to make sure I got enough in for this part, because I'm about to make another part for this video. So chapter 6 is going to be the final one for this video, and chapter 6 is titled "You Can't Swim in Cowboy Boots." So Johnson talked about how much they knew that they were different, and other people see them as different, and talking about the importance of family vacations, and talked about how their nanny talked about how back in my day we didn't have vacations and stuff like that. We didn't have luxuries, but y'all deserve to have luxuries. I don't want you to go through the same things that I went through. Y'all deserve to experience joy whenever you have the opportunity to achieve it. So and so every summer, Nanny has a vacation with their grandkids, and Johnson was along in the ride. And there was this one time when they were in California, there was this shoe that was trendy at the time. I forgot what it was called, but it was these sneakers, and every teenager or kid wants it, but Johnson wanted cowboy boots, and I think their cousin was like, "You want cowboy boots? You don't want to be with us? The other kids are saying this shoe is hot, and you want cowboy boots?" And Johnson said, "I just want cowboy boots." And I forgot what was their fascination with. I think it was their fascination with Westerns or something like that they want cowboy boots. And they were young. And Johnson was talking about how their nanny was saying if George wants cowboy boots, then we'll give them cowboy boots. And talking about how Nanny respected their desires and prioritize their joy and what would make them happy and not make the situation more traumatic than it probably was. So and Johnson was talking about how also talking about learning to swim and the protection that Raul and Rasul were giving them. So talking about how much little Raul and Rasul meant to them. So they taught George how to swim and also how to fight. So whenever Johnson was getting into some altercation or something like that, like they can protect themselves thanks to their cousins, and swimming was an example. So also talking about why black people they don't swim and stuff like that stereotype, like why black people are afraid of water and why they don't swim. So Johnson read this article recently. It's this recent Guardian article on why black people probably have a traumatic relationship with swimming. And it probably all goes back to the Middle Passage during the transatlantic slave trade, during the waters and stuff like that. Like some of the people that were about to be enslaved, they jumped off the ship to not succumb to slavery. So and then they eventually drowned and stuff like that. So that and swimming pools, there were segregated swimming pools and stuff like that. Like black people weren't allowed in certain swimming pools. Like if y'all know about Dorothy Dandridge and how she just dipped her toe in a swimming pool, and the next day the swimming pool was closed, and I think white people were disinfecting the pool and stuff like that, and I think the water was out too. So it was stuff like that was going on in racism in swimming pools. And yeah, so it was this good quote that Johnson said. The real question we must each ask ourselves every day is, am I willing to swim, or is this the day that you drown? And this was in the 90s, so black people were probably still going through trauma with water, and learning to swim where is helps you confront that trauma and get you to a place of healing, and you don't have to run away from water. And Johnson also said, many times this decision will be in our hands. Sadly enough, in a world that continues to kill black queer people every day, that decision isn't always ours to make, but I swim anyway. Every single morning, I put on my goggles and dive right into the deep end of racism, homophobia, and every other oppression that is thrown my way. So talking about how going to swim in a swimming pool, you can find similarities in and waking up every day and living and trying to navigate through society and knowing that traumas might hit you and oppression might hit you whenever you go. And that's the same with water. Like you have to keep swimming and stuff like that. So it's in the metaphorical sense, and how you should tackle oppression. And Johnson also said, "Are you teaching people how to swim, and are you letting them drown?" So talking about you have to help people, and how to not just fight oppression through your own activities and your own capabilities, but also help other people and know their capabilities and what they can do. And they got that from when Lil Raul and Rasul were helping them learn how to swim. And that was it for that chapter. So this is it for this video. So I'm gonna make another part soon, so stay tuned for that one. And thank y'all. Make sure y'all follow my reading list at Raisin Souls and on Instagram, and my personal Instagram at Intellectual Albert. And stay tuned. Thank you for turning into part 1 of All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. So we're gonna have another part soon. So stay tuned for that, and thank you.